Welcome all to our conversation about a wonderful book that has been released this month, A Little More Social, Understanding the Science of Everyday Interactions. This is our conversation with the author and Booth professor, Nicholas Epley, who we like to call Nick around here. This is a wonderful time to introduce myself as well. I'm Seth Green. I'm the dean here at the Graham School at the University of Chicago. And welcome virtually to our gorgeous campus, which is every bit this green and beautiful at this time in the spring. And for those who are not familiar with us, you should be. The Graham School is now more than 130 years into our mission of trailblazing paths for lifelong learning so that people across all ages and stages of life can be part of this very special intellectual community at the university. I'll just mention that if you want to continue your event journey with us, we have many other exciting conversations coming up tomorrow with David Rubenstein about civic virtue, early next week on a course that will be in the summer on Wuthering Heights, and then a conversation about a new vision for midlife by Dr. Margie Lackman that will include conversation about the importance of being social. So very related to today's topic. I'll also mention that summer school registration is open. And with that, let me take down my screen because you are all here for the same reason. You want to hear from Nick Epley, who is an award-winning and noted behavioral economist at our Booth School. He is an extraordinary author and thinker. He is someone whose classes fill up regularly in the hundreds, and he is also just a really nice guy. And you saw his full bio in advance of this. I will also say that his book is everywhere. So I am not someone who is really like with it on social media. So for something for me to go viral, it basically has to be Taylor Swift level because I just don't see it otherwise. And I have literally seen Nick all over. He gave a huge TED Talk. Every like major figure in literature and writing has endorsed this book. So Nick, it is our joy to have you with us. And maybe most of all, you are a future faculty member of the Graham School because you're going to be teaching a summer course. So with that, let's get started into the conversation. And I want to start with what I see as the paradox that's at the heart of this book and your work. And it's that, being social makes us happier. It makes us healthier, right? There's a lot of evidence. And yet we so often don't choose to connect. Yep. And so I'm curious if you can just start there. What holds us back from this thing that is seemingly easy and makes us happier and healthier?
Yeah. So first off, thanks so much for having me, Seth. I love talking to lifelong learners. That is my favorite group to connect with. So I'm delighted to be here and to support everything you're doing at the Graham School. I'm looking forward to my class this summer too. That'll be great fun. Yeah. So my research. I'll actually back up from this paradox just a little bit. For the last 2.5 decades of my career, I've been studying mind reading for a living. I'm a psychologist at the business school here at Booth. And by mind reading, I mean, how we think about others' thoughts and beliefs and attitudes, and mostly how we screw that up and misunderstand each other. And I had kind of a eureka moment one morning on a train ride on my way into Chicago where I noticed this paradox that you described that I thought my research might have something to say about. And that moment was sitting there on the train. I live on the far south side of Chicago in Flossmoor, come into Hyde Park every day to the business school here on campus. And I'd noticed this for years, but this morning it just sort of struck me. I was writing a chapter from my first book called Mindwise about how our brains are unique on this planet for its sociality, uniquely equipped to connect with the minds of others, how we're made healthier and happier by reaching out and connecting with others. And yet I looked around on this train. We got a whole carload of people made happier and healthier by connecting with other people, neighbors on the south side of Chicago. And we were sitting
total silence.
Total silence, right? You could have heard a pin drop. And I had a moment which was sort of a what the heck are we all doing here? Does this make sense for us to be doing this? And so, I put other people in experiments for a living, but this morning I decided to put myself in an experiment. A person sat down next to me, a woman who was maybe 15 to 20 years older than I was, African American woman, dressed very professionally for work. She actually had a huge like bag that she was carrying, like a massive mom purse, I would think of it as, like, but kind of like she was moving out of the house. We kind of chuckled about this a little bit as we got talking, and had this fabulous red hat on. And I decided this morning on the train, I'm going to try something else. I'm going to put myself in an experiment here and just pay close attention to how it goes. So I turned to her, uh, and the second I did, my brain was like screaming at me all these reasons not to do this, right? Like, here she is sitting next to me. Clearly, she doesn't want to talk to you. Otherwise, she would be talking to you, right? She's probably going to think you're some kind of creep trying to hit on her, and you got nothing in common. And anyway, there's no reason to engage with. Just keep to yourself. You're going to be impolite or rude to bother her. Let her in peace, right? That, by the way, is the barrier that holds us back. I ignored that, right? I decided to test that, and I worked on my courage a little bit, and I turned to her and I said, "Hi, my name's Nick. I love your hat. I have one just like it." Right? Which, you know, is not going to make its way into the Hall of Fame of conversation starters anytime soon, but it kind of didn't seem to matter. She turned to me just totally lit up with a bright smile, almost like she'd become a different person, right? Like the face that we walk around with, when we're
Right.
kind of on our way to do something, it's not a friendly face usually, right? Our resting face can be grinchy. And she turned to me just lit up with a huge smile, almost looked like she looked like a different person, like you do at the moment, Seth. And then the conversation just got rolling, right? We talked about our lives. I kind of joked with her a little bit about moving out of the house with this massive bag, and we chuckled about that a little bit. And I learned what she did for a living. She wasn't real happy about her job. I asked her what a dream job would look like for her, and she felt kind of stuck and in her job. And what I remember was when I got up to leave, the 30 minutes had just disappeared. Like it just vanished so quickly. What would have been an otherwise kind of dull 30 minutes just was gone. And when I got up to leave, I noticed two things. One, that was pretty nice, right? Like, look, it wasn't a life-changing conversation, but that 30 minutes of dull conversation was better. And she, in fact, had stopped me. I got up and she kind of held my wrist for a moment and stopped me and said, "Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today." Right? And she really meant it. So it was nice. The second thing I noticed that I think is even more important for me is that it was surprisingly nice. That is, my expectations beforehand when I turned to her was that this was going to be awkward or weird, or she wouldn't really want to talk. She's got no interest, right? And it was that gap between my beliefs about how that would go and how it actually went that really started me on a decades-long journey now, trying to unpack that gap, right? So what holds us back, you asked at the beginning, from reaching out is believing that other people don't want to.
Right.
In fact, what we find in our research is that's often wrong.
Well, it is a great entry point because, of course, this is not just a ride with someone with a great hat. This
Right.
ultimately becomes your research
Yeah.
project. And
Yeah.
then you look at how people on trains are actually happier if they are talking to strangers. Walk us through those Chicago commuter experiments and assume as you do so, there are some skeptics like me in the
Yeah,
room
for sure.
who actually believe that I am happy to just keep to my work and be able to type on my computer
Yeah.
as I'm on the train. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
what did you do, and how did you prove people like me wrong with your research?
So obviously, a single anecdote is not data. It's just an experience. So what?
Right.
So I had a nice
You need two
conversation.
anecdotes, I think, and then it's
That's not
trend.
right.
Yeah.
Third becomes honest truth, right?
Yeah.
Two is still a question mark. But look, as I'm a scientist, I'm a researcher, and so we don't take anecdotes as evidence. We take them as curiosity points, right? And so I got back to my office that day, I remember, and I talked to my amazing PhD student at the time, Juliana Schroeder, who is just a workhorse of a researcher, and she is up for anything. And when I got here, I told her, look, we got to go to my trains. We just got to go to the train and see if this is like a common thing, and run an experiment there, like a legit, serious experiment where we try to understand why folks are doing this. And so we went to the train station just north of where I live. We live in Flossmoor on the south side of Chicago. That has an above ground station, which doesn't work for running experiments in February here in Chicago. So we went to Homewood, which is the station to the north of us. They have got an underground entryway. And Juliana would drive out there like 5:30 in the morning with donuts and bananas with my lab managers, and would get in there and start the experiment. And the first experiment we ran was one where we just asked people to essentially do what I did on that train that morning. So we recruited people for the experiment for a commuter study, gave them a $5 Starbucks gift certificate, which, word to the wise, Seth, is the
Is
most
the
valuable
greatest.
incentive on the planet. They'll do anything for that. And
I
we,
respond to that, Nick.
there
I
you
mean,
go.
that would get me talking
I'd
to
have gotten
someone
you in it.
else.
I'd have gotten
Yeah.
you in for sure. Um, and then we randomly assigned them to do one of three things. We asked them to do one of three things. In one condition, we asked them to just keep to yourself in solitude, just focus on your day ahead. Another condition, we told them just to do whatever you normally do. That's our control condition, which is mostly keep to themselves. And the third condition, we told them to try to have a conversation with the person who comes down and sits next to you. Try to get to know him or her a little bit. Try to make a connection. Okay. At the end, at the end of the ride, we asked them to pull out a survey that we had left with them, and we left gave to them, fill it out, and send it back to us. And the survey basically asked them, "How good was your commute?" Right, that was what it was, and how positive was your commute. We also asked them how productive their commute was. That didn't differ across the three conditions. They reported their commute to be equally productive. But what we also found was that those in the connection condition actually reported having the most pleasant experience.
Hmm.
And those in the solitude condition reported having the least positive experience on average. That is, on average, people reported the same kind of experience that I did. Their train ride was better when they connected in conversation. And overwhelmingly, they found somebody too. Nearly everyone said that they were able to talk to someone on the train. Um, but then the question arises, what's holding us back? If that makes the commute better, why do we sit there day after day in silence? And so to test that, we ran another experiment where we recruited people from the same train station. And this time we asked them to predict how they would feel if they were in each of these conditions. As a psychologist, what I know is that if I want to know what you're going to do, the choices you're going to make, I don't want to know about your experiences when you're in a situation. I want you to know how you
Feel
think the
what you're
situation is
thinking.
going to make you feel, right? Because that's guiding your choice. If you think that talking to a stranger is going to suck, you won't do it. You won't find out that you might be wrong about that, right? And so when we asked people to predict how they would feel in each of these conditions, we actually found that people predicted they would have the most positive experience if they kept to themselves, and the
Mhm.
least positive experience if they connected with a stranger. Their beliefs, their expectations weren't just wrong, they were precisely backwards, right?
Yeah.
And we replicated this on the trains in Chicago. We've replicated this on trains in London. We've replicated this on cabs in Chicago. We find this effect, at least in these were the early experiments. We started finding them all over, kind of everywhere we looked.
Well, so why? I mean, so as you said, that our expectations about social interactions are precisely backwards,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
As you've looked into this, why are we so systematically wrong about something that we do every single day? And why
Yep.
don't we seem to learn? Okay, so I get it maybe the first time, but like why after you have that experience with the woman and you hack about the hat, like then I would think you know it's a good experience, but does it actually change you just from that? So like why do we have that assumption? And then why over the course
Yeah.
of our lives don't we overcome it based on experience, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah. So, why do we get these gaps? So there are a couple of reasons that we've identified that
Yeah.
show up that show up very consistently that think can explain most of the variability, or a lot of it at least. It can explain a lot of it. One is that the perspective that we have about ourselves is different from the perspective that other people have of us. We tend to evaluate ourselves in terms of our competency, whereas other people tend to interpret us in terms of our warmth. And so when we think about engaging in an interaction, what we're focused on is what are we going to talk about, right? Do I have anything in common with this person? Am I going to be able to carry on this conversation? Um, but when other people evaluate us, they're generally not thinking about our competency, then tend to be thinking about our warmth. So when you
Mhm.
reach out to somebody in a positive way to establish a connection in the ways that actually build relational connection that increase our happiness, that tends to be evaluated favorably because other people are paying attention to our warmth. It is inherently a warm action. But if we're thinking about our competency, we're going to be focused and worried about the wrong thing. And on average, you're going to tend to underestimate how well this will go because we're just focused on the wrong thing. So that's one.
Yeah.
Second thing, which we find in conversation and lots of other places too, is that our expectations miss a really key ingredient about what happens in interaction. And
Hmm.
that is most interactions are reciprocal. Reciprocity is the most powerful social norm in existence on the planet that we know of. When I reach out to you, you tend to reach back to me in a similar way. If I reach out to you with a smile, you tend to reach back to me with a smile as well. I say hi to you, you tend to say hi back to me. I wave to you, you tend to wave back to me, right? But people's expectations don't quite anticipate that constraint on their experience. They imagine that a person
Hmm.
could respond almost anyway, and they're just kind of wrong about that. They don't see the magnetic quality of the power that we have when we reach out to somebody else to encourage them to reach back to us in a similar way. And if you don't anticipate that really strong magnetic power, you're going to underestimate how positively someone will respond to you when you reach out positively to them. And then the third thing is that there are certain beliefs that are just self-fulfilling. So if I think that connecting with you, Seth, is going to be unpleasant, I'll be happier just sticking to my laptop. I won't try it, and I won't find out that I would be very wrong in your case,
Right.
right? Optimism gets calibrated. Pessimism does not, right?
Yeah.
Pessimism does not. And so I think with those three things, we can explain this gap.
Okay, so part one, we want to talk to that stranger on the train. So let's get to another really interesting observation that you have in the book, Nick, which is that even once we begin to have that conversation, we tend to stay shallow because we
Yep.
underestimate that the other person may actually want to have a deep conversation. Can you talk about where that comes from and what that costs us? Because it turns out, based on your research, that we actually really value deeper conversation.
Yeah, I don't think that's a surprise to anybody on this call that there's a reason why the word hate is often used in such close proximity to small
Mhm.
talk, right?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
those are fine. It's fine to connect with people in that way, but what really draws us together is actually getting to know somebody, is actually learning something about somebody, learning
Yeah.
an interesting thing about them or something that they care about, and then sharing with somebody, something that you care about that's important to you. Um, and yet, and even when you ask people, right, how deep are the conversations you're typically having in your life, and how deep are the conversations you'd like to be having? The gap is massive, right? Typically, people would like to be having more meaningful conversations in their lives on average than they actually are. But here too, just like reaching out to engage with a stranger is a choice, once you're talking, you've got to make a choice. Well, what do we talk about? Right?
Right.
And a lot of that is under your control if you choose to use it. Social connection is not just something that happens to us. And this is a really, really important insight from our work. Social connection isn't just something that happens to us. It's a choice we make. It's a choice we make about, do I reach out to engage with you, or do I hold back and avoid that interaction, or that conversation? And all too often we find, because of misplaced expectations, overly pessimistic expectations, we choose to hold back. So when it comes to deep conversation, what we find, just like we did on the train, people thought others didn't want to talk to them. They
Yeah.
underestimated the power of reciprocity. When I reach out to take an interest in getting to know you a little bit, you tend to be interested in getting to know me a little bit. That's kind of the way it works in real life, in real conversation. Not always in our imagination, but in real conversation. And that's true in deep conversation too. People were worried about how interested another person would be in having a meaningful conversation with them. But we've now run over 5,000 people through deep and meaningful conversations, including a lot of LSI folks as well, who I've
Yeah.
done this with many, many different times. Very wise people, but unwise in this particular regard, where we give them questions like, what are you most grateful for in your life? Please tell me about it. Or can you tell me about one of the last times you cried in front of another person? Right. And when I put those questions up on the screen and they see what they're going to talk with some random person in the room about, you can often feel like a pall just falling over the room. People kind of start eyeing the exits and maybe wish they hadn't come to this session today. But once I actually get them involved in the conversation, the problem I have is getting them to come back, right?
Yeah.
For the conversation, I tell them how they expect the conversation will make them feel, how awkward it'll be, how connected they'll feel to their partner, how much in common they'll have with their partner. I also often will ask them, What would you rather do right now? Have this conversation or take a break, right? Like just not do this at all, please. They then go off and have their conversation. They then come back and I ask them to tell me how the conversation actually made them feel. And the gaps between those two things are massive. I don't even need to show them the data. You can just feel it in the room.
Feel in the room.
Suddenly
Yeah.
the room is energized. People come back with smiles. They're hugging each other. They're handshaking. They're exchanging business cards, right? And the gaps are huge. Before the conversation, on average, across these 5,000 conversations, about a third, a little over a third say, I'd rather take a break right now, right? Sometimes that can be over 60%, depending on the group I'm with. When they come back after the conversation and I ask them, what would you rather have done right now? On average, only 7% say I would have rather taken a break right now.
Mm.
Overwhelmingly, they shift in the direction of preferring that conversation afterwards, right? So it doesn't just show up with engaging in, a stranger in conversation. It also shows up in having deep and meaningful conversations, not just with strangers, but also with our acquaintances or even people we love, right? We're often a little reluctant to have those conversations, mistakenly so, I think.
Well, and so Nick, you acknowledge there's still a 7% group there that's saying
They
maybe
needed to go to the
no, right?
bathroom or who knows what it is. Yes.
And
Yes.
I'm thinking of, an introvert listening to
Yeah.
this conversation
Yeah.
potentially.
Yeah.
And, in theory, extroverts get extra energy from some of that social,
Yeah.
introverts it may sap depending on the context. Can you talk a little bit about, is this a universal? How do people
Yeah.
know if this is true for them, even if it's
Yeah.
true in the aggregate, if that's a fair
Yeah. Yeah.
question?
Yeah. Well, so those are very different questions. Let me take each one in turn. First, you
Yeah,
mentioned this hypothesis that extroverts get their energy by talking with people and introverts get themselves by doing things more in solitude. That's a great theory. There's just no evidence to support it.
for it. Okay.
In the data,
Yeah.
when you actually have people engage in interaction, people are generally energized when they are interacting with someone, and that you see that in the data. The actual experience
Right.
get more energized, and then you get tired afterwards. It turns out that fatigue is similar for extroverts as well as introverts. That
Huh.
doesn't vary
Yeah.
across. People believe it does. It's
Does it vary at all situationally? Like maybe the extrovert likes the party and the introvert wants to connect one on one, or even that isn't
I've
accurate?
never seen that
Never
evidence,
seen that
right?
either.
So
Okay.
what
Yeah.
what you
Yeah.
see, and this is a little tricky. This is a little tricky.
Yeah.
The way psychologists and many people actually analyze this stuff is they ask for people's beliefs
Yeah.
about what they're like and treat that as reality.
Yeah.
What we find is
Right.
that
That doesn't predict.
extroversion and introversion predicts people's beliefs about themselves.
Ah,
It just doesn't as well predict their actual experience in these
fascinating.
conversations. So
Yeah.
extroverts think that they will enjoy connecting with other people and strangers in a conversation more than introverts do. But when we actually put them in conversation, we don't see that effect.
Yeah.
I think the way to think about personality is more about the type of person you are than
Yeah.
about the type of experiences you tend to have. But notice your beliefs about the type of person you are guide your choices. They create habits. They can become the type of person you are over
Right.
time based on the choices that you actually choose to engage in. We find that the biggest gaps between expectations and experiences are among folks who report being the most introverted. And I'll also note two other things about introversion and extroversion. First off, it's actually not that helpful a concept in daily life. It actually doesn't predict much of our behavior. What most predicts our behavior are the situations that we're in. So my advice is to kind of let that
Get
later
rid of
slide.
that. Right.
You are capable of lots of different things. Everybody on that call is. And the data suggests that if you'd like to feel a little bit better in a dull moment, reaching out and engaging with another person, no matter, being kind to somebody, being nice to somebody, is going to lift everybody up on average, regardless of where you think you fall on the spectrum. The second is that people overestimate how introverted they are
Hmm.
relative to the rest of the population because we only see our own introverted behavior. Other people don't see us getting tired after talking to somebody, right? They don't see us after the party when we go home and go to bed. We only see other people in their extroverted moments, right?
Right.
We don't see them in their introverted moments. And that information asymmetry can lead people to think that they're more introverted than they actually are. So my advice is think about yourself as a person full of amazing capabilities, until you're tired, you're fatigued, whatever. There are all kinds of reasons why we might not want to engage, but believing that you can't do this or you wouldn't enjoy it or that other people don't want to connect with you, I suggest if you want to figure out how this applies in your life, do what we've done in our research, which is just test that belief.
Yeah.
I don't take, in my research as a scientist, I don't take people's predictions about how they're going to feel as fact. I take it as a guess, as a bet. I can be wrong about how much I'm going to enjoy something or how I'm going to feel about something. And our data suggests we can be systematically wrong. I treat it as a bet, as a prediction. And you can test that in your own life too. When we test it in our experiments, we often find that those predictions, those bars that are keeping us from reaching out and engaging are miscalibrated. And you can test those bars in your own life too. You can run yourself through experiments to not take those predictions. I'm an introvert. I can't engage with people. I can't connect with people. I'm too shy. I can't do this. Or that person doesn't want to talk with me. Test it. Test it over and over. Put yourself in a good
In
experiment
that
where you do
role.
this repeatedly and just see how it goes. I think you'll be surprised.
Well, I'm going to turn to the questions that are populating our chat in a moment, but I have one more, Nick, before we get there, which is we obviously are living now in a world where interaction and communication can take place in many forms. It can take
Yep.
place on a train. It can
Yep.
also take place via social media.
Yep.
It can take place via, lots of tools. We are regularly interacting,
Yep. Yep.
right,
Yep. We are.
with all sorts of, including artificial intelligence now.
Yep.
I assume that me, talking to my artificial intelligence is as good as talking to a human, and there's nothing special about human connection. But I just want to check that with you and make sure that, being on my phone 24/7 doom scrolling is as good. On a serious note, like
Yep.
what does the actual research say about all of these different devices of interactivity we have now versus the, the 3D on a train talking with one another? What do we know about
Yeah.
those, and how do we think then about where media, comes into this question of
Yeah.
social connection?
Yep. So let me take your first question first, then I'll talk about where media comes into this
Yeah,
about social connection. So remember what we talked about at the beginning, that there are really two big things that make social interaction kind of positive. One is that it's warm and friendly, right? A
yeah,
lot of these interactions. So we also, our research also goes far beyond conversation. We find people are overly reluctant to express their gratitude to somebody else because they
yeah,
underestimate how positively they can make other people feel. They underestimate how positively others will respond to a simple kindness, act of kindness, or a compliment. They underestimate how positively others will respond when you reach out to ask for help or are honest with somebody in your relationship. So this is a big thing. My book, I mean, the reason my book is more than 3 chapters is because this is a big phenomena that shows
yeah,
up in lots and lots of different places. And remember, what makes these social interactions rewarding are two things. One is warmth. So when
yeah,
you are in a context, a situation where you can clearly communicate your warmth, that's what tends to connect us. How do you do that? Big one is your voice. Turns out your voice communicates a lot of warmth to another person, communicates thinking, contexts that allow you to actually speak or communicate with someone in that way that conveys warmth, connects us. Typing to each other just doesn't have it, right?
yeah,
Typing to a stranger, you feel kind of dead, right? I've been spending some time on LinkedIn because I'm trying to get the word out about my book, and lots of people connect with me in nice ways right there, but it's a little like drinking soda, diet soda, in terms of the energy I get from it, right? Because it's text, right? It's kind of dead. It's not
yeah,
like somebody telling me, I love your work, right? Where I could hear it. So voice is really important. Interactions, media that allow that create more connection than media that don't. You can pick up your phone and call somebody. That'll be great. Type into them, not so great. Okay. Second, the other thing that really connects us is reciprocity, the ability to go back and forth dynamically, right? Lots of technology are more like monologues, right? Serial monologues. I write this long email to you. It can be thoughtful and meaningful. I don't want to undervalue that. It can be very thoughtful and meaningful, and that's great. So if it's communicating warmth really well, great. But what really connects us is the dynamic exchange back and forth that we have with our voices when we're actually talking to each other. And so a lot of what technology is doing is allowing us to connect with lots of people quickly and easily. There are great parts to that. Those are not necessarily rewarding in the moment in the same way that actually talking or connecting dyadically with someone would be one-on-one in person, or even sending, a meaningful note to somebody that really communicates with your warmth to them. So The way I think about technology is the way, most people think about it. It is a tool. Uh, we don't always use it wisely. What we find in our research is that people don't fully appreciate what they're losing, what the difference is between using your voice or communicating in a dynamic way versus just typing to somebody. They expect that it will be received similarly. It is not. And so a lot of this technology are tools we can use, and we go through cost benefit calculations, right? I'm really busy, I can't talk right now, but I can send you a text, or I can't get downtown, so instead of calling, I'm going to type to you quickly, whatever. They're cost benefit calculations. What our data suggests is that we're often unaware of the cost that this technology is actually imposing on us, which
Yeah.
is the extent to which it's stripping sociality out of our lives. And so we find that people use it unwisely. So I'll give you a quick example. We asked
Yeah.
people in one experiment to reach out to old friends. They could either type to their old friend or talk to their old friend. They predicted that talking would be less awkward than calling. Or sorry, they predicted that talking would be
Right. That talking would be more awkward.
right.
Yeah.
Talking would be more awkward than typing. They thought they'd feel more connected if they called up their old friend than if they typed to them. But when we asked them to say what would they prefer to do, two-thirds said, I'd rather type than talk. Right?
Yeah.
We then, and we're experimentalists. We don't let people do what they want to do. We
Right. You
randomly
force
assign
them
them
to
to do one
call.
of those two things, right? And what we found is that when people actually called their old friend up, they found the conversation to be much more rewarding than when they typed and no more awkward, right?
Hmm.
And so if we had allowed people to do what they thought was best, they would have chosen unwisely because they misunderstood the power of voice and that dynamic interaction to really connect us and didn't understand what typing to each other was really losing. It's losing connection, is what it's losing.
So a question that is appearing throughout the chat, Nick, and it relates to what you've just said, is around how we shape the generation that has grown up with these tools.
Yeah.
Because growing up with these tools has meant as a habit,
Yep.
right? If I want to interact with you, I text you, I
Yep.
send a message, right? I know with my daughters, right? Like calling is something that is, very unusual. And so we've
Yep.
tried to get into the habit with them, with their
Yep.
grandparents, with all sorts of different, but it's
Yep.
not easy. COVID obviously
Made it
made
worse.
that even harder because we
Yep.
weren't in each other's spaces having those
Yep.
conversations.
Yep.
How do you see almost at a macro level? So a lot of what we talked about is how do I as an individual overcome this fear? Are there macro things we can be thinking about to try to potentially rescue in some ways a generation that grew up without a lot of these habits because of a number of phenomena taking place
Yep.
and who may not realize how much happier they could be. And I imagine some of this too is that if I lose the ability to practice this, maybe if I don't have that skill at all, it
Right.
is a bit more awkward because I haven't done it ever before, if that makes any
Right.
sense.
Right. So one thing I want to be a little cautious about
Yeah.
is that whenever we find biases of the kind I'm describing, a very easy reaction is to think, oh, I can see it in everybody else. I don't do that, of course, but I see this in everybody else. And so I want to be a little bit careful about being too harsh on the younger generation these days.
Absolutely. No, and that's not
Biases,
harsh. Yeah.
the biases that I've talked about, like the deep conversation, I've run this
With
with
every age group.
high school kids, like I
Yep.
did on Monday this week in Indiana, and also with senior citizens at a senior citizen living center in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I find the magnitude the same of the bias across these groups. So this
Yeah.
is a phenomenon that has been existing for a long time. It is made worse by phones. There's no doubt. And there is no doubt that kids these days are living in a different kind of world, growing up in a different social ecosystem than most of us who have a little more patina on their degrees and in their lives grew up with. There's absolutely no doubt about that. So
I mean, Nick, is a fair way to say it that the bias is there. These tools, though, have in some ways enabled that
that's
bias
a
to go
great way to
further. Is that a,
that's a great way to think about it. So these
yeah,
tools allow you to act on that pessimism
right,
more readily, right? And if you look at how we're in fact choosing to spend our time, you see the biggest change in human behavior of the last two
right,
decades is we're spending more time alone and we're talking less to each other.
right. Well, I've even seen, teens lined up who are texting to each other rather than using their voice, even
That
though they
said,
are adjacent, right?
that said, I've also been into airports. I've gone into
Yeah,
airports where I've gone into airport restaurants and see old people like us
right. Doing
sitting
the
with
same
their
thing.
backs along the wall, right?
Right. Yeah, yeah.
In two-seat tables separated by a quarter of an inch, and none of these people talking to each other, right? So again, let's be
Right.
fair here. My
Across
mom,
ages.
my
Across
mom
ages.
comes to the house, and I got to tell mom, can we put your iPad away? We don't use that in our house. We keep it in the closet for a special. So okay. Anyway, all right. So to your question, how do we think about this at a macro level? That's hard, right? That is hard. I will say I wrote a little more social, not to appeal to the macro level. I'm a psychologist. I want to know what's happening between the ears of everybody on this call. And I want to encourage you to think about and to question those barriers that are popping up in your mind that are keeping you from reaching out and approaching somebody in a kind way, having more meaningful conversation in your life, lifting other people up a little bit more often with the power that you have to be kind and decent and good to other people that we too often underestimate. And that's where the book is written. To think about this at a macro level scale, I can't target people's beliefs. We need to do something else. We need to create uh, structures, environments, situations that put people in different kinds of contexts. I'll give you one kind of nice example. So David Booth, I work at the Booth School of Business. David Booth is one of is our namesake here. He runs a capital management company in Texas, and he has in his lunchroom he has a community table where the folks who work for him can sit. They get a discount on their lunch if they come and
Hmm.
sit in the community table to talk to each other. Right? That's beautiful. That creates an opportunity to engage. Okay. At the University of Chicago, in all of our incoming MBA students at Booth now, second day of their orientation event, they get me as their faculty member. Right? They don't hear from any other faculty member during their orientation, but on their second day, they hear from me, and I run them through a deep talk experiment so that they can feel these effects of engaging with other people. We put it into the structure of the experience that our students have so that they feel it. You do not, kind of at scale, think your way to feeling different. You feel your way to thinking differently. And if we want our students, the people in our organization, to feel differently and therefore act differently, we have to create situations, structures, environments that they can't choose to avoid in some way. They are just in it. Our train cars ought not have a quiet car on them without also having a bar
And a
car on
talking
the
car.
back end where you can get together and talk, right? Our lunchrooms ought not be oriented in ways that allow students to isolate themselves as much as encourages them to connect with each other. Our orientation to university life shouldn't be purely individual. It should be collectively experienced well with structures that enable folks to connect with each other. So that's how I think about it. Our fair city of Chicago, architects often think about this.
Yeah.
Downtown Chicago, which is behind me about 10 miles, is designed by architects who are wise about sociality,
Yeah.
right? Who designed the Riverwalk with public spaces where people can gather and connect. The building that I'm in right now has the Winter Garden in the middle of it where our students can get together and gather and connect. And so when we think about changing sociality at scale, I don't think we're going to get the phones out of people's hands. The tech companies are making too much money milking our attention, but we can create spaces that connect people. And if you're running an institution or an organization, you can design opportunities for folks to connect in ways that just kind of make it part of the infrastructure that you're in.
Well, so we've had a lot of questions about the how side of this,
Yeah,
Nick. So Brian asked, what are the impacts of the way you non-verbally engage a person prior to a conversation? Do you have
huge.
any tips
Yeah,
for us on
huge,
eye
huge.
contact,
Yeah, yeah,
how to smile?
yeah. Let me give you two. So one, this is brilliant, comes from the Ritz-Carlton. Remember, warmth is what matters. We got to be
Yeah.
doing what you're doing right now, Seth, right? That's your default when you're around other people is to have that kind of smile, right? Um, and so the Ritz-Carlton famously in their hotels to create a more hospitable environment encourage their employees to practice the 10-5 rule. And this is just should be a habit for everybody in their lives. When somebody's 10 feet away from you, you smile at them. When they're 5 feet away from you, you say hello. You
Hmm.
start putting into that practice into your life, you'll get a lot more smiles and hellos back. Not 100%, right? But you'll get a lot more in your life. The second thing is we often worry, I think people often think that to become a better conversationalist or communicator, what you need to do is a set of questions to ask or content tips like that to do. That's important, and I can tell you more about those if you'd like. But the thing that I think is really important is to change your mindset about other people. In chapter 8 of my book, I tell a story about Jia Jiang, who was an aspiring entrepreneur worried about rejection. He decided he was going to try to get rejected 100 days in a row by asking people outlandish requests. Turns out he failed at that. He failed at that not because he didn't ask people outlandish requests 100 days in a row, but
People said
because
yes.
people said yes a
Yeah.
lot, a lot. That story is worth reading in the book. I love talking to him. He told me that he changed the way he lost his fear of rejection, not because he developed thick skin, but because he learned that other people were kinder than he thought they would be, right?
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of the way we approach other people is really about the mindset that we take towards other people. If you're afraid of other people, you're scared, you think they don't want to engage with you, you're not going to engage with them. If you start taking an interest in other people, if you listen to Bill Nye, famous science guy, I saw we had somebody from Ithaca in the room here. I'm a Cornell grad, go Big Red. Bill Nye is a Cornell grad, famous science guy, said, everyone you ever meet knows something you don't.
Yeah.
Damn, he's right about that, right? Everybody has a story for you. If you approach people with a genuine curiosity and interest, that your goal is to find that, you'll find it. You'll find it, and you will approach them in a way that helps to bring that out of them. You will automatically become a better conversationalist. I think everybody in this room has the ability, the capacity to be good at connecting with other people. In fact, when we ask people to come up with deeper questions than they could be asking another person, they're good at it. Instead, we too often choose not to use it, right?
Well, so this may be an ironic question off of that, Nick, but Sherry asked to give us examples of
I'll tell you.
how
Okay,
we
I got a few.
how we talk in a deeper and more meaningful
Yeah.
way in conversation.
So you can do the two-step, the deep talk two-step, which is usually you ask something shallow kind of first, right? What is it you do for a living? But then the comeback, the second step, is to go right to the top. You don't need a long runway to get deep. You can go from a question that's outside a person to a question that's inside a person right away. You can shift from asking what to asking why,
Why?
for instance,
Yeah.
right? So why is it you do this? You can shift from asking about something, some objective feature about the person on the outside to some subjective feature on the inside. Your second question ought to be about a feeling. Do you love what you do? Right? Was this your dream job? Right? That's the second follow. And right away, second question, I'm already at something you love, right? Or I'm already to your dreams, right? On your second question. And you can do that. You have the power to do that. And what we find in our research is that other people enjoy those conversations as much as you do. The second thing I love to ask people, you can do this even in just one step. I do this often in cabs, on planes, whenever I'm meeting a new person, I'll ask them, what's your story? Right?
Hmm.
Tell me your story. How'd you get here today? And they kind of get that that's not about, oh, what, I walked up, the stairs. They get
Right.
that that's asking them about, now give me your story in your life, give me your background. David Brooks, right, who's a big fan of the Graham School, once said to me, and he's written this in his book as well. He's taken encouragement from this suggestion, which I gave to him a long time ago. He said, how often when I ask people to tell me what their story is, do they say, none of your damn business? The answer is never. Never do they say that, right? You take an interest in another person, they'll tell you what they got to tell you if you're genuinely interested. I think the message from this book is fundamentally empowering. The message from our research is that you got more power to create meaningful connections in your daily life than you think you do. You just have to choose to use it.
Well, so Nick, we are coming up at time, which is a shame because you are such a fountain of wisdom. I do want to get in that you are teaching a course this summer at the school.
I am,
Can
yeah.
you just describe how you're going to put these ideas into action in the
Yeah.
context of a
Yeah.
course?
So what I'm thinking of this as, which I'm totally thrilled about, and Seth, thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this. This is
It
going
was
to
a
be
hard choice to invite one of the best psychologists in the world to help us think about these things. But, one of my proud moments as dean is making the hard decision to ask Nick Epley to teach with us.
this is going to be a month-long book club with practices. And my hope is to put everybody together, sometimes in small groups. I mean, we'll see. This is the first time I do it. So if folks on the call are participating, please be forgiving with me as we kind of figure out how to do this. Put people into small groups from time to time. I'll send you with practices out in the world to do. I've got practices that go with each chapter that will hopefully help you figure out how you can be a little more social in your own daily life and put this into practice. And by the end of the month, I'll hope you'll be a little empowered, a little more empowered to reach out and connect with people more often in your lives to make it better.
Well, I will just close by saying that since I started reading this in preparation for our conversation, I decided I was going to try some of the experiments, Nick. I have talked to a few people on the train. I have written to old friends who felt it would be awkward because it's been too many years and why not? And to a person, it has been a wonderful decision. I thought it would be, but it still exceeded my
Yeah,
expectations.
yeah,
So thank you for your research. It has moved us, I think, in a positive direction. I mean, I know that it's, an easy thing to research because right now we are just, as socially connected as ever as a society. We
yeah,
trust each other.
right.
But
Yeah.
on a serious note, you are moving us in a very important direction. And I'm giving your book to my mom because my mom always said, never talk to strangers, Seth. I'm going to hand it to her and say you were just absolutely wrong. And at 46, I'm going to talk to strangers, and Nick Epley is the reason why. So thank you, Nick, for being with us. Thank you for teaching with us, and thank you all for joining us. And go out and be social. And I know all of us will be better off for it.
Thank you, Seth. Really great to be here. Thank you, everybody, for joining. This has been super fun.
Bye. Thanks all.